Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of The Alarmists. And today is a really great day. We have an amazing icon in the music industry. The man has 135 gold records. He's been behind some of the most iconic music that we've listened to in the history of modern music. Bill Schnee, he is going to be on the show today, and we're going to talk about the great artists that he's produced, people like Carly Simon and Barbra Streisand, Ringo Starr. He's worked with all the greats, Sergio Mendes, Henry Mancini, Clive Davis, behind the scenes, the Power Brokers. Let's bring on Bill Schnee. All right. Hey, how are you?
Hey there.
Nice to have you on. The thing about you that I really love is you're old school. And what I really want to know, you said that you love the process of making records. And that is the thing that, we don't really hear much about that anymore. And I would love you to go into that a little bit because you've brought greatness to so many artists. And I think it has to do with that process. Explain that to the viewers so that they get a better understanding.
Okay. Well, with technology, what's happened is that having virtually a professional studio is within the grasp of every musician. And of course, if you've spent your life learning engineering and learning how to mic and so on and so forth, it doesn't bode very well for someone like me to think that when they buy that system, they're automatically engineers. But in addition to that, as in untrained engineers, in addition to that, what's happened now is that rather than people going into a room and playing together, a lot of times the song starts with nothing more than a click track, and then people overdub in their own individual houses. So we don't find anywhere near as many sessions starting with a group of creative people in a room together making music.
In fact, if I may interrupt, I mean, even the songwriting process has been, you got 20 people writing a line. They call them songwriter camps. How the hell can you do that? Can you write a song like that?
I always say whatever it takes to get it done, but I'm with you. We've got, you look at the bevy of material, like the Great American Songbook, that all these things are behind me, the music from, and into the 60s and 70s and whatnot, and all these great songs that have been written. It only took one or two people to write all of those, but it's a different world today. But I don't want to sound like an old fart either. In fact, I just started producing a girl where I've done it in the modern way. It's kind of funny. I have a huge collection of vintage microphones because I believe them, the old tube microphones, because I believe them to be the best. And yet on this girl's project, the only microphone I used was on her voice. Everything else was in a computer with samples of other kinds of sounds and whatnot.
But you knew to do that, or was that?
Sorry?
You knew to do that.
Yeah, I chose to do it. This is what her music demanded, and so I've done that way. So styles and all kinds of things, including art, change over time and whatnot. So it's just different. But yes, to the main point that I think you're alluding to, the idea of putting creative people in a room together, there's nothing like it, bouncing off of each other and the synergy that comes from that.
And I think that's why a lot of music today comes off a little bit monotonal. You made in your book, you talk out, by the way, Bill has a great book called The Chairman at the Board. Don't confuse him for Frank Sinatra. This is the chairman at the board.
He's chairman of the board. I'm chairman at the board.
You know that I actually broke the story of his death, which if you Google me, so I understand all that stuff. But you say in your book, you point out that Henry Wadsworth Longfellow made a statement. He says, music is the universal language. And as different records speak their language, they become the fabric of our lives. And I think that you have produced many of those records. And by fabric, how many times do we listen to a song and it brings us back to a precious moment that makes us smile or that brings joy to our lives? And I think a lot of that is missing today.
Yeah, I've wondered about that for some time. I think about a lot of the songs that I started, that I did earlier in my career, that still seem to hold the test of time. And when I listen to so much of modern music, I just can't imagine, listening to those songs 30, 40 years from now. it'll be interesting to find out.
What do you think is missing? I mean, you know, when we talk about fabric, you know, we think about like some of the songs that you've been involved with. When I think of You're So Vain, I know exactly where I was. When I think of Photograph, I know exactly where I was, you know. I mean, you know, these days, there aren't that many songs that bring me back.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I've wondered that myself. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah. All right. I mean, now you've been there at the beginning for Sergio Mendes, Henry Mancini, Herb Alpert. I mean, these were the beginning, and then you had a key moment with Clive Davis. And Clive Davis, I did a very important interview with Clive in 1988 for Hits magazine. That was very important for the projects that he was working on, and that, you know, from there it led on to Whitney Houston and so forth. Tell us about your relationship with Clive, because Clive is an incredible soul that has brought together so much great talent, and he really is the last of a certain type of record executive and record producer that exists these days.
Yeah, yeah. The record men, sadly, are all gone, and it is sad. You know, as the companies were sold over the years, we found instead of guys like Clive Davis at the helm, we have lawyers and accountants, and they started to defend
the suits, as you're a 60s guy like me.
The evil suits that would depend on the, you know, and on their A&R staff for making the creative decisions on who to sign and so on. And yet those guys themselves, the suits themselves, are not the best people to pick someone like that. Whereas a person like Clive Davis would be excellent for picking A&R people. But what happened with me was I started in a band. We got signed to Decca Records right out of high school. We didn't make it. We got a second record deal, and the producer of our second record deal was a guy named Richie Podler, who was not only a phenomenal musician, but a phenomenal engineer and producer. He went on to produce most all of Steppenwolf and Three Dog Night records, a host of other records. And he, when we went into his studio, which was a lot funkier than Capitol Records, where we had recorded for Decca, I came into the control room after we cut our first track, and I looked up at the speakers, and I never heard what I had heard out of our band recording at the great Capitol Studios. Mm-hmm. And I turned to him and pointed at all of his equipment and said, "Can you teach me how to do all this?" And he said, "No, I'm teaching Cooper. Get out there and do another take." But that was the aha moment that I knew what I wanted to do. So I went off and learned it on my own. And,
despite your father, you know, I had the same. No, I'm telling you, man, I don't know what it is, but there's a lot of us who've had, you know, when you start having ambitions and doing things that are not within the stereotypical realm, you know, when are you going to get a real job, Bill?
My dad turned to me and said that when I had about two Grammy nominations and 8 or 10 gold records. And when are you going to get a real job, Billy?
You sound like you're Jewish like me. Why is it the Jews suffer like this?
Anyway, I had to appease him. I was never going to be a doctor, so the only other option was what? A lawyer.
Right, and then an accountant. God help us.
So when I finally got my first job in a real studio, I started law school, and I got through the first semester, started the second semester, and my grades weren't good. They were all C's and a B because I'd been faking it. I didn't have time to do the reading with all of the sessions I was doing in the classwork. So I decided to quit for a year and a half. I had quit college for 2.5 years chasing my band. I decided to quit for a year and a half. And if that didn't work out, you know, go to law school. And it had been about a year, and I was ready to go back to registering and to register for law school. And when a friend of mine who got a gig at Columbia Records told Clive about me, and he basically called me up and said, "What do you want to do with your life?" I said, "I think I'm going to go back to law school." And he said, "No, you don't want to go to law school. I went to law school. If you have music in your blood, you know that's what you want to do." And I said, "Well, I would like to, but," and he basically took the butt away and gave me my shot. So I'm very indebted to Clive.
When I read your book, you can't help but it was like a magnet, music to you. You know, it's just something that I don't think it's just the job, but the things you got to do, Bill, and you're still doing it, but the things that you got to do, when I read about, the people that you've gotten to be, part of their musical journey, it's extraordinary. I mean,
Yeah.
I have a list here that I just want to go through it. I'll do it
Well,
pragmatically as I
before you
listen.
hit the list, let me before you hit the list, since you mentioned Clive and how great he is, you pointed that out, and I couldn't agree more. I was doing an album with the phenomenal R&B singer Teddy Pendergrass, who, those that don't know, he was an incredible singer, and he unfortunately had a very bad car accident, became a quadriplegic, and I was mixing the album, his first album after he became a quadro, and the producer, we were mixing all the songs, and the producer said, there's a duet on this album. I'm going to go record the duet partner. I'll be back in a little while. And so when he came back, I said, well, how was she? And he said, oh my gosh, this girl is drop dead gorgeous and sings like a bird. And I said, what's her name? And he said, Whitney Houston. And Clive had signed her. He signed her so no one else could. And he signed her early on, and then started on his plan for making a superstar. And he's done it again. He's done it before and he's done it since. But he really put a lot of effort into her, and I think did an amazing job. And so that duet was on Teddy's album, and then I mixed to some of the her
you
first
did The Bodyguard,
album,
didn't you?
That was on that one as well, along with the singles that I mixed.
You did The Bodyguard, right?
And then, well, yeah, The Bodyguard, that's quite a few years later.
My friend Bette Sussman played keyboards with her band on the I Will Always Love You cut. You know Bette? Have you met Bette? She's a keyboardist. She was the musical director for Bette Midler.
Oh, yeah. I think I met her with Bette.
Right, yeah, probably, I'm sure. Yeah, so she was a big part of Bette's musical journey. It's incredible when you talk about that old school person, and Clive Davis was truly the idol maker. I mean, he's a real life idol maker. He knew how to package somebody and nurture them. And that's the thing. We don't have the nurturing of an artist anymore.
That's another thing that's lost, since the record business has kind of turned in on itself. It's figuring out now in a streaming world how to be profitable and become profitable again. And they are, but it's nothing like it was in the days when they would sign all kinds of artists. I mean, now the way I look at it, Bill, before they would sign someone, like A's, B's, and C's.
Right.
And then things that had to be signed, like jazz artists that, even if they didn't sell, they had to be signed, because.
Meanwhile, jazz is the thing that's existing beyond everything. They kept saying it was going to die, and it's never happened.
But today they only hit the guys that can hit, or the groups or whatever that can hit home runs, and they only give them one shot. And that's another thing about it. Back in the day, they would give an artist, not just, artists need time to develop, and they would give them that, meaning they would do an album, and if it didn't work, they do it again. And, it was Clive actually is one of the main people at the end of the 60s into the 70s that was responsible for turning the record business into an album-oriented business as opposed to a singles-oriented business. When I went to work for him, he told me that he wanted the artist to be the product and not the single. Up until that point, like with my band, we went in for Decca and did 4 singles, and if we'd had a hit, we would have run in and cut 6 more. And we didn't have a hit, so we didn't cut 6 more. And that's how you lived. You lived by your singles. And
that's kind of a short-sighted way to make music, because if the artist succeeds and you nurture that artist, you're going to get so much more fruit from that artist in the future.
Right. So for instance, the first thing I produced for Clive was a rock band called Sweat Hog, and we had a moderate hit, top 30 hit. But the point is, that was an album. They had put out an album that didn't do anything really, and Clive gave them another shot. And so on the second album, we had some success. Unfortunately, they broke up after that album.
Isn't that great? Make a record, get a hit record, a moderate hit record, and then break up.
Yeah, it happens. Here's another case, a group called Pablo Cruz that I produced, and they had done one record, and it got some acclaim, and everyone thought there was something there. And that's when I met with them, and they wanted me to do the second record, but I told them they weren't ready, and they didn't like hearing that, so they went and made the second record on their own. And then they sent me a demo for the third record of a song called "What You Gonna Do," and I heard it and knew it was a hit, and I said, "I'll be right up." They lived in San Francisco. But there's, A&M gave them 3 shots, and I mean, today you could only dream of something like that.
And speaking of giving shots, I didn't know this, but I didn't know that Walter Becker and Donald Fagen, their first song that really made it was with Barbra Streisand. I think that's almost like an oxymoron,
Well, like so many artists, they started as songwriters, and I'll never forget, David Gates of Bread. I loved his story because he came out from Oklahoma to Los Angeles, and he said, I was getting covers on my songs, but I didn't like the way anyone was recording them. So I thought, I'm going to try to record them myself, and turned into quite a career.
Quite a historic group of albums there.
Yeah.
And then you've also you've worked a lot with Barbra. You got to know her. I loved in your book how you talk about how she humanized you, and you were so moved by that. When you're working around an icon like that, and suddenly it's just you and her, or you and him, and you suddenly, it's about just the humanity of it all. We don't hear enough about that. I mean, you must look at a chocolate-covered pretzel very differently than most people.
That's from the book, which is funny because when I wrote it in the book, I was thinking like, this doesn't sound the least bit weird now because you find them all over the place. But the story he's alluding to is that on my first time working with her, which was in 1970, I think 71, we got on pretty well. And one day I came into work at Columbia, and there was a little box of these chocolate-covered pretzels with a note from Barbra that said, thank you or something. And I'd never heard of a chocolate-covered pretzel, and it was some specialty shop in Beverly Hills, I guess, that was making them.
No, it's great. I mean, it's great that you got to have that kind of experience. I also like the fact that, you were talking about how it was just Barbra on the couch and the two of you, suddenly, I mean, but this is the thing that you got to do this. And, it's one thing just to put music on tape, or now it's digital, but you got to know the personalities behind the music that we all continue to listen to 30, 40 years later. And it's pretty amazing to me.
Yeah. One of the working titles for the book was Best Seat in the House.
Yeah, I like that.
Because that's what it was. And that's what I realized when I went to work for Clive and started engineering for Barbra was, because at that point in time, I'd worked mostly with rock kind of acts in my earliest times. And now all of a sudden I had this unbelievable singer, 20 feet from me. And here I am holding a knob that's connected to 20 feet of wire that goes into the microphone that this unbelievable singer is emoting into. And it was like, wow, it was really quite something. And it's continued to be.
That's the thing that I like in your book is, you're admiring them, you're expressing the joy of what they do, but there is this you're very humble about it, the way you present it, and I think that is what makes it so special to read your book. It's that, it's not just about, I recorded this hit record and that hit record. You really get into the soul of somebody. And even like with Carly, talking about the relationship she had with producer Richard Perry, which most people now, unless you're in the music business, may not remember Richard, but Richard was behind so many great records. And to reveal the things you revealed, the pressure that an artist feels from a producer, and, you're an outsider looking in, yet look at the result. Yeah. Talk about that relationship that you observed between Richard Perry and Carly Simon, because Carly, didn't see eye to eye with Richard quite a lot. And James was, the protective husband. So get into that a little bit.
This is before a husband, though. They were boyfriend and girlfriend, but not married yet. So, so Richard knew me as a rock kind of guy. And he went to England to record the first album he did with her. I think it was her third album. And he did it at Trident Studios with one of the Robin Cable, one of the early engineers of the early Elton John records. And he called me from England and said, I've been working on this record. It's almost finished. We're on the last mix, but there's 2 more songs I'm not going to mix with Robin. I want you to mix them because they're the rock songs. And that's because that's how he thought of me. And of course, the funny part about that for me has always been that he thought of me, I was thought of as a rock guy because of where I came from. And the record business loves to put you in boxes. And so since I had started having a lot of success with pop records, 8, 9 years later, I couldn't get a rock act if I tried. But anyway, when they came back to Los Angeles and I started on the first mix, and Carly got to the studio before Richard. And so she was talking about how rough it was working with him, because she said, it was, I've never fought so hard with anyone in my life. I had to go to the doctor and get sedatives. And even when we were mastering,
did you ever witness any of that?
No, not a bit. And the mixing was all fine. I could tell though that Carly definitely is the kind of person that kind of artist. She was the most artistic artist I had worked with. Meaning, not that Barbara isn't artistic at all, believe me, but she doesn't write her own songs. And here Carly has got all of these beautiful songs that she's woven together and is going to be very involved in how they're developed. In fact, I just had reason to listen to that album again recently, and I was once again amazed at the lyrics on that album. They're just beautiful. So anyway, even when I met James a little while later, James Taylor, and he in the mastering, and we were outside talking, taking a break, and he said, I'm never going to let her work with him again. It was just too hard on her. It was just too hard. But of course, the album came out and does incredibly well.
Success does things to people,
and all these things that end up changing. And then I was involved on the recording of the next 2 albums that Richard did with her, and everything was fine. I don't know, that initial record must have been tough, but after that, they got along famously.
Yeah, maybe he saw something in Carly that Carly was not focusing on, and sometimes you have to push.
The thing is, when she wrote "You're So Vain," she didn't. She's talked about it that she didn't want it anything as rocky as it is. She had a vision in her head, and he fought her on it and won. Mm-hmm. And so I think a lot of that goes to it too. Where Richard was brilliant. There's no question about it. He was a handful sometimes, but he was brilliant. And I think she probably, things like that, where he was pushing her against her grain on her songs, which she'd probably had complete control on the first 2 albums. But when it worked out just fine, I think that allowed her to relax probably and let it happen.
And you admit in your book that you had a crush on Carly.
It was easy to do. That's all I can tell you. I'm sure I'm not the only one. Yeah. She's very witty and just a supremely sweet human being.
I had the pleasure of interviewing her when she was married to Jake and living on Central Park West, and she invited me to do the interview in her apartment. And I found her to be so personable. She was not like a lot of the artists I met. It was like she was welcoming me into her home. I wasn't just a journalist. I was, she treated me like I was a friend and was very open and very forthcoming. You didn't have to do much to get her to speak her mind.
Right.
And that's what I liked about her, because a lot of artists, they're looking at their publicist as they're doing the interview. Is it okay? Can I breathe now? And Gladys Knight is another one. We have a lot of overlap, you and I, and a lot of the artists you've worked with, I've sat with them, and Gladys Knight is one of them. And Gladys, I don't know if it was the time, it was around 1988. She seemed very, very despondent when I sat with her. She kind of opened up and said to me, this was not for the interview. It was just somebody who cared to listen. She just seemed like she needed to just speak. And she just was not being handled right. And I just wonder, knowing how she had to jump from Motown to Buddha Records, she seems to have had a lot of battles that she's had to face. Yet, she managed to still get those hits and those classics. What was your insight on Gladys?
The funny thing about that one to me, I never met her. A lot of times these things happen where a lot of times some of the big artists.
She didn't come to she never came for the mixes. No.
That wasn't uncommon for someone that doesn't write their own music. And so I mixed this song. I started mixing in this album, and it had the song "Neither One of Us Wants to Be the First to Say Goodbye," which was actually a country song written by a really good songwriter that just passed away, Jim Weatherly.
Mm-hmm.
And this, the other people have found the connection between country and R&B sometimes. Well, that certainly was one. And I mixed the song, and I fell in love with it. It was one of those times, oh, this is such a smash. And Motown puts it on the shelf. And I was going, I just couldn't believe it.
Well, there's definitely had to be some. Berry Gordy had a bit of a reputation of being very tough on his artists, and who knows?
Oh yeah. Well, I don't know what happened, except that the next thing you know, she jumped to Buddha, and right around the same time they put it out. Now I don't know whether it was that Barry thought that it was too country, it was too something in that regard, it wasn't funky enough or something. I don't know. All I know is that she ended up with a hit. She ended up with 2 Grammy nominations the same year for that one, and one of the ones also written by Jim Weatherly on Buddha. She went on to have two more Jim Weatherly hits.
Midnight Train to Georgia.
Yeah. So I'm hoping to meet her someday to ask her.
She's really, I tell you, man, when you meet her, there's no star attitude. There was never an attitude. She was really just like, you do what you do, I do what I do, and let's have fun and make it a great interview, whatever. Even at a cocktail party I was invited to afterwards, she just didn't carry around that attitude that you find in a lot of performers. I always find that kind of attitude is based in fear. I think they're just afraid more than anything else.
And what a gift! What a gift that girl has! Just incredible voice.
And what a gift you have to guide their careers the way you've done it. And you're technically the last person that worked with all the Beatles. Is that true? I think that's true. Correct.
Well, the Ringo, the first album with Ringo in '73, that was we ended up with one day having 3 of the Beatles. It was John Lennon's song. I looked at that album as kind of, in retrospect, is that the guys were all kind of giving Ringo a leg up. They knew their solo careers were going to probably do fine, but since they all write, but Ringo not being that much of a songwriter, so they thought they'd jump in and help him.
He's a lovable guy. Come on.
Oh yeah, it's just the greatest.
You can't not love that man.
Just the greatest. Yeah. But when it came time for the John song, that was great. And we had 3 of the Beatles in a room recording. It was the first time since they'd broken up, and the last time. And the saddest part of the deal is that Paul, who also jumped in on the album and wrote a song for him, I'm convinced if he couldn't come in the country because he had a drug bust. And in those years,
right, that was the Japanese pot thing.
Yeah, so he couldn't come in for a while. But if he could have come in the country, there could well have been a Beatle reunion, because I think the bad blood with he and John had kind of settled in those few years. So we had to go to England to record Paul's song. But yeah, that was quite a night.
I've met somebody who knew about the inner circle of the Beatles, and why do you think they broke up? Do you have it? You saw a lot of things, man. I mean, you went to Friar Park where George lives, and you were around them, and your book really details the I can't believe, holy shit, I'm in a room with all these people, and I'm I mean, come on, I mean, no matter how much professionalism you can have, you have to, a little bit of you becomes a fan, because you can't believe you're in that room with all these people. But
yeah, well, I'm 25 years old, and here the most popular band of all time is I'm working with all of them, different legs.
But you saw a lot of stuff that went on there. Do you have a theory as to why they broke up? Because I have a source that says to me that although Yoko is always the fall guy, so to speak, and why they broke up, that it was actually Linda who was pushing Paul to break out on his own.
I've read it all, like you probably have. There's all kinds of, who knows. Did
you ever witness stuff when you were?
No.
So it was just all about the record.
Yeah, oh yeah. And what can I say? I mean, Paul and Linda, when we went to England, couldn't have, I mean, the most the most gracious people you could ever meet, just phenomenal. He was in the middle of doing a video for his band, and invited us down to the video shoot, and stopped right away to welcome Richard and I, and just as gracious as they could be. Just wonderful, wonderful people.
It's interesting. You made a description in that portion of the book, in that chapter, how John couldn't look you in the eye, yet Paul and Linda were so warm. What do you think it was about John that made that intimacy so difficult? Because I met him once. I have a little story I'll tell you after you tell me yours, and then I'll tell you mine.
Well, I certainly don't know the exact thing. All I know is that John was brilliant. There's no two ways about it.
Absolutely.
And it's not that he wouldn't look you in the eye. It was that his eyes were always like this. He was just flitting around all the time, because his mind just went like that. And I'm a little bit that way myself. Kind of
ADD, maybe a little ADD.
Yeah. Yeah. So that who knows anything more than that. I can tell you this, that the conclusion I came to after working with them is a little bit like another duo in the Eagles, where we have the one guy that's a little more poppy, shall we say, and happy-go-lucky, and then the other one is a little darker, a little more morose, maybe. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking about Fry and Henley in this case.
Of course.
and yet you put you put those two together in both situations, and look what came out of it. It's amazing, just amazing.
Well, you could arguably say the same thing about Paul McCartney and John Lennon.
No, that's what I'm saying. That's the comparison I'm making. Just works the exact same way.
And you were smart enough to keep the vocal track you did for Ringo, which
on John's song, he sang a rough vocal so Ringo could learn it. And in those days, I think that was 16 track. And so, it reaches a certain point where we had to erase the rough vocal to put on instruments to add to the record. And fortunately, I had the presence of mind to go ahead and put my rough mix down on tape, and I put it away and never did anything with it for, I think it was a good 20 years, until someone at Capitol called, and they were doing some kind of a John Lennon retrospective after he died and so on. And as the guy was asking me questions about those sessions and whatnot, and I thought, this is the time to pull it out. And I said, boy, have I got something for you. And I took it out and sent it to him. And I sent it to Richard, because Richard didn't even know I had it. And they put it on the album.
And I love the story of going to dinner at George Harrison's mansion, Friar Park, and how you're claustrophobic.
I'm not exactly claustrophobic, but you bring this up because what existed there, that the original builder of the castle, and it was a castle, has this whole series underground catacombs that were built. And why people did this, I'd love to find out why you would want to do that. But after dinner, some of their George and Patty at that time, rock star friends, started showing up. And they're sitting around, and all of a sudden someone said, should we go down under? And another one said, yeah, let's do it.
So you were there with Ron Wood, with Patty and George. Who else was there that night?
I can't remember. Whatever I said in the book. I know a lot of them I didn't know.
Peter Sellers? You said Peter Brian Wilson?
He was at the session. He wasn't there.
Oh, he was at the session. Okay. I mean...
the Ringo sessions in LA, but we went underground and these things, and we started in one place and you went underground, and it was great sport for them. They loved doing it and trying to scare each other. And for me, it worked really, really well. All I can tell you, and it took quite a while to get through them. It was a lot of dead ends. It was like a house of mirrors, except it's all tunnels underground.
Oh my God.
That are, and I'm, 6'2", and I have to watch my height a little bit under there. But I mean, I can't imagine what it took to dig all this out and whatnot. But I couldn't have been happier when we came up and I saw moonlight again, and we came above ground, and we were, I don't know, it seemed like an eighth of a mile away from where we went under. It was quite a labyrinth.
And I love how you talk about that night and how you told me how Patty actually cooked the meal. You know,
Cooked,
she
yeah.
she got her fingers dirty, got in the kitchen, and I'll be right back. You know, and going
Yeah,
back
I
and
mean,
forth.
they were just, like a normal couple. And when I got there, and George came to me and said, well, why don't you go down by the lake? And he is over at the window, he's pointing, and I look out there and I go, do I need to take a golf cart or something? And so but yeah, she cooked, and they were complete vegetarians. And at that time, I was eating meat. I stopped red meat a few years, 6 years later, 79 or something. I haven't eaten red meat since then, but they were complete vegetarians, which I thought at the time was ridiculous. I mean, why would you not eat red meat? This is silly. And yet I remember it was fabulous. And I remember thinking to myself, geez, I would, I'd be a vegetarian if I could eat like this every time.
Right. No, it's great that you got to experience that. And I'll tell you my John Lennon story. So I dabble a little bit in songwriting. And at the time I had a little group with a singer who sounded a little like him, but the songs were really original enough. So one day we were seeing a lawyer there named Jules Kurz, who was involved in the music industry. And as a little joke, I said, his name was Peter. I said, Peter, let's go visit John. And I figured we're by the Dakota. We could take a quick walk by the Dakota. And to my astonishment and amazement, I'm looking beyond the Dakota and I see John, Yoko, and 1-year-old Sean in Yoko's arms crossing the street, heading right towards me. So me, with balls of steel, I take out our demo tape from Peter's pocket and I had the balls to walk up to John and go, John, my friend here, we have a little band, and you're his mentor. You're the guy that he looks up to. He sounds a little bit like you. Would you listen to our demo tape? And to his astonishment, I mean, Yoko, I still remember, I've interviewed her a few times. I've told her this story, the look on their faces. And all of a sudden, with one of John's classic witticisms, he says to me, I'm sorry, but I don't hold auditions. It's classic John Lennon wit, So anyway, there's my little story. And the thing about George Harrison, they always say he was like the silent Beatle. I was at some get-togethers in LA when he was doing the traveling Wilburys, because I did a lot of interviews with Roy Orbison, so I got to witness one of them. He was a chatterbox. I didn't expect it from him,
Yeah, I found the same thing. The quiet Beatle was not so quiet.
No, not at all. What are you working on now? What are you doing? Is there anything you can talk about now?
Yeah. I've just finished 2 albums that'll be out fairly soon. Both of them are really, really great. One of them is a guy named Michael Feinstein. You probably know.
Oh,
that
sure,
name.
from Carlisle.
Yeah, and he's a piano player and just an amazing person, just an incredible human. He's probably the foremost authority on the Great American Songbook. He not only knows everything you'd ever want to know and maybe things you wouldn't want to know, but I've been to his house in LA and I've seen some of the incredible collection of anything and everything to do with that era. I mean, he just, and he actually worked for Ira Gershwin when Ira was alive. Well, he came up with a crazy idea to do Gershwin songs done as duets with country artists as the duet partners, and a very bizarre idea. And the producer, good friend of mine, Kyle Lenning, didn't know what to think of it at first, but then thought about it and called Michael and said, Michael, what would you think if we did this album with no piano? And Michael is a piano player, and all of those songs were written on piano. And Michael thought about it for a second and said, I like that. And so we did it with this gorgeous backdrop of all acoustic instruments, accordion, fiddle, upright bass. And it's just between those beautiful songs, those chord changes, all done acoustically like that, which you never hear, and the great lyrics and stuff. It's quite an album. The other one is
what
also
label?
incredible.
What label is it coming out on?
I'm sorry.
What label?
Concord.
Okay.
Concord. And I'm not sure. Now that it's been done for a while, but we were waiting. we were waiting through COVID to get Alison Krauss, the phenomenal singer Alison Krauss, on it.
Yeah, I know her.
And we didn't even think it was going to happen because she was very insecure about COVID and didn't want to leave. She didn't leave the house for 9 months, 10 months, but she finally did. We finally got the vocal, and it's all done.
Good.
But anyway, and the other one is I've only produced one country record in my life, and it was a long time ago. A girl named Mandy Barnett, and in the book I say one of the best singers I've ever put a microphone in front of, and that's true. This girl is phenomenal, and she just did an album with the songs, a Torch album with the songs from Billie Holiday's actually second to the last album, but arguably the best one. All the Torch songs from In Satin, and arranged by the great Sammy Nestico, who's an old school arranger from the 50s, 60s, and so on. And it's a cute story. The producer called him and said, you know, would you want to arrange these? And I've got a phenomenal singer and these great Torch songs. He said, Fred, I'm 95 years old. Let me do one. And if you like it, then you can get someone to model it.
95.
He turned in the first one, and it was gorgeous. And he said, all right, let me do two. And you know the rest of the story. He did them all.
Wow.
And I cut it. He couldn't come to LA. He couldn't come to Nashville because of health. But I cut it live with a 60-piece orchestra.
Wow.
And the incredible singer. And
see, you don't get that 60-piece orchestra. Who's doing that? Nobody.
And I'm telling you, it's called Every Star Above, Mandy Barnett, and I think it's out next month. And it's one of the best albums I've been involved with in the last 10, 12 years. It's just absolutely breathtaking.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Alarmists, we have the great Bill Schnee here. Bill, tell people where they can buy your book, Chairman at the Board.
Well, I'm told it's everywhere. Books A Million, Barnes & Noble, and of course, Amazon, where most books,
yeah,
over 50%, 60% or something now are on Amazon alone. But yeah, I think you obviously read it. It's, as I said in the intro, I wrote it for anyone like me that loves music and records, but hasn't been as fortunate to go behind the curtain. So I think it's for those people that like music. I hope people seem to be enjoying it. So I'm
look,
really
anybody who loves the icons of the music industry and wants to learn a thing or two about what they were really like and what it was like to record them, you got to read Chairman at the Board. Bill Schnee, thank you for being on my show. You're amazing, and I hope to have you back again because there's so much that you've done. We could do 2 or 3 shows. You know,
I've had a very blessed career,
and I'm glad that you didn't listen to your father.
Yeah.
Get a real job, Bill.
And as my mother pointed out, so is the legal system.
Yeah, exactly. All right, man. Be good, be safe, and stay away from COVID and keep making great music. Talk soon.
Thank you very much.
All right, man. Bye-bye.